Hello and welcome to ClockTower Game Studios. This week we're going to do something a little different. We're going to revisit some Anvil Industries Daughters of the Burning Rose models. This one is for a model swap for Melanie W. from Canada. We've made arrangements to swap models via Instagram, and this week I'm going to post the video of me working on her model. So this is one of the Anvil Industries daughters, like I said. In this video, I will be completely cleaning up, magnetizing a bunch of different spare parts, and then painting the model in one of the two schemes I've chosen for my armies. I really like this scheme. I think it looks good, and I hadn't done a tutorial on this paint job, so I figured I'd take this opportunity to revisit the entire thing from start to finish and show you guys my process. So the first thing I do is I sort out all of my bits, get them all organized, make sure that I have the weapons that go with the particular hands. If they have to be matched up a certain way, I make sure that they're matched up, and I just kind of sort them all out, get them all placed on my mat how I want. So while I'm doing that, I just want to make sure and be clear that this is not a paid for promotion in any way. Anvil Industries isn't paying us to record this. They have no idea even that I'm actually doing this review and this project. So I just want to get that out of the way and make sure that you guys don't think that I'm being paid to give a particular opinion on this. All opinions expressed are entirely my own. That said, I absolutely adore and love these models, and I can't recommend them enough. The detail is amazing. They fit together great. They have a huge line of intermixable parts. They're really an amazing company and amazing models. Like I said, the detail on them is just fantastic. So on that note, since there are so many different options and different bits you can mix and match, magnetizing these is a really great way to stretch your dollar, and it's also a great way to make sure that your models are, great for use in a variety of different situations for whatever game you're playing, especially right now with one of the bigger games, Warhammer 40,000, just got their new edition, so of course everybody's trying to figure out what the best models are and everything. If you magnetize your models, when new stuff comes out or rules change, it's a great way to future-proof your army for that. Instead of having to buy and build a whole new model, you can just buy bits and then customize your models accordingly just by using some magnets. It is a little bit of extra work, but in the long run, I think it's worth the effort, just based on the money it saves, if nothing else. So with that said, I'm also really happy that they've given us permission to use their models on our products. This particular model range and some of their regiments line as well, we're planning to make use of in S.E.E.R as one of the core factions that's built into the game setting. They will be representing the Sisterhood of Res, which will be sort of Magitech, sort of tech level galactic explorers dedicated to trying to figure out what went wrong and why the galaxy is the mess that it is. So I'm really excited to be able to use these models for that. So as you can see, I've moved on to the second step of the building process, which is to go through and clean up all your bits. All I'm doing in here is I'm cutting off and cleaning off any of the resin gates from the molding process. Just being careful using my hobby knife. For some of the bigger gates like this, you just carefully cut it away. Be very careful. These are sharp implements. You can cut yourself very easily. I do it on a regular basis, sadly, but you should be more careful than I am. So after getting the gates trimmed off, the next thing to do is just to go around and any flash or mold lines, carefully use the edge of your hobby knife to scrape those away. Usually you can just flick it away like that. Some of the bigger bits that are stuck, or just a little bit of scraping like that with the edge of the hobby knife. So I'll go ahead and get that done, and then the next step will be to move on to magnetizing. Okay, so the next thing to do is finish cleaning up your bits, and then we're going to prep and drill the holes for the magnets to sit into. Now, these Anvil models, as you can see, have a little divot for some of the joints, particularly the waist, the shoulders, and the head. They all have like a ball and socket or a sort of hole and peg sort of arrangement so that the bits will fit directly into the correct part of the model and sit correctly. So here I'm just getting out the finding the size of magnet that I want, and I've used this previously on other models for another video, but here I'm just, like I said, I'm picking out the right size magnet so I know what size hole to drill. Once I've got that figured out, I take the couple magnets I need and leave them out, and here I'm just going to try and start fitting and sizing, and there you can see that that hole's not quite big enough. There's a little bit of a gap in between the arm and the torso there. So it's time to just get with it. So I know I need to drill a hole. The next step is to get out my pin vise or my hand drill and find which drill bit is going to be the correct one. And then once I've found which drill bit is the correct one, I'm basing it off of the size of the magnet. And I just want there to be, I want it to be just a hair bigger. That way there's a little bit of room and I can make sure that the magnet will fit down into the hole that's going to be created with a little bit of space for glue and a little bit of play so it has room to actually sit. So here I'm just going to start drilling the hole. I'm going to be careful, take my time, just drill out the pre-existing hole and make it deep enough and wide enough to fit the magnet we're using. And as I'm going through and drilling out my hole, I just go back occasionally, like you just saw, and check the depth to make sure that the hole is deep enough and the magnet fits completely. The ideal depth is just enough to put the magnet into and have it sit flush with the outer shoulder's face so that the entire joint is hidden. And you just keep drilling out a little more and testing until you get it to where you want it. Now that we have the holes drilled out large enough for our magnets, we're going to go ahead and start getting them glued into place. So the first step is to just put a little bit of super glue, and it does have to be super glue. Nothing else will hold the metal to the resin or plastic or even other metal the same way. So you have to use super glue for this. So the next thing to do is to take a pre-existing part that matches the polarity of the magnet you want. So here I'm using a left arm with the shield onto the left side of the torso to make sure that the polarities of the magnets will match up and that they'll both be correct every time. I do that for every model that has the same range. That way they're all interchangeable parts. And the ideal here is that the top surface of the magnet will be flush with the outer surface of whatever part you're inserting it into, like you saw there. And there I'm just going to go ahead and continue doing the same thing on the other side. Here you can see I've got the arm that I'm going to magnetize, and it has a little peg on it that fits into a hole in the shoulder. So I'm going to start by cutting that off. And then once that's done and I've got that cut off, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm just going to use my hand drill, drill a hole, make sure it's the right size, and then I'm going to insert the magnet the same way and make sure the polarity is matching. That's the biggest takeaway. Okay, so off camera, after I finished the magnetizing, I went ahead and took care of the next couple steps off camera because they're not exactly camera friendly, but I primed the models in Tamiya Smooth Gray, or Fine Gray, excuse me, and got all the bits glued to paper clips so they would be easier to paint individually and so I could handle them all. I'm kind of going to treat this like batch painting where I'm going to do the same step across every individual bit as I go and then go back and clean it up and then move on to the next step. So I'm going to start by doing a base coat of Citadel's white scars, and I'm just going to shake my paint up and then kind of water this down till it's a good consistency and then start my base coating. Get that all in there. And here we come to the first step in actually painting the models. So we're going to start by base coating all of the armor, in this case the hard plate armor, with Citadel's White Scar. And we're just going to water this down until it's roughly the consistency of skim milk or 2% milk. Not quite water, but not quite whole milk, somewhere in between. And you're just going to, once you've got that going, you're just going to base coat the whole thing. You don't really need to be super neat about this. Everything else is going to be a darker color that'll go on over it really easily. So it's not really a big problem to just really layer this in there. The biggest thing, like I said, you want to make sure your paint's the right consistency, and you want to make sure if you get any air bubbles in it that you pop those air bubbles and drag them out of the recesses and the details so they don't smudge up and make the details softer or completely invisible. So just take your time, be relatively neat, but you can kind of do this in a hurry. After your base coat has had a chance to dry, the next thing to do is to go over all the white you just did with a very liberal heavy wash of Citadel's Seraphim Sepia. And like I said, this is okay if it's a nice thick heavy layer. Just be careful that it doesn't pool in any of the big flat areas because that'll cause some problems later that you'll have to touch up. Not a huge deal, but it can be an issue later. So just kind of keep it from being oversaturated. Other than that, be as liberal with this as you want. Okay, so now that your wash has had a chance to dry, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to give all of those same model areas a very heavy overbrush of Ushanti bone from Citadel. And what I mean by overbrush is you take your paint and similar to how you would do a dry brush, you use a stiff bristled brush. Like in this case, I'm using a cheap, previously used makeup brush, and I just treat it just like I would dry brushing. I just go over it. I make sure to go across all the sharp edges, and that's gonna, on the flat areas and on those edges, it's gonna leave a layer of the Ushanti bone that's gonna give the armor more of a softer, creamier bone color as opposed to the really sharp reddish brown color that it is just after the wash. And yeah, I ended up breaking a couple off of the paper clips, but you can just put them back on or work around it. I think I just worked around it, but anyway, so just go over all of the armor bits like this. Like I said, you're doing an overbrush, which is kind of like dry brushing, but with more paint on your brush, so you leave more of the surface, the new color of paint. Okay, so once you've done the overbrush of the Ushanti bone to kind of give everything that creamy bone color. The next step is to go over the parts that'll be the bronze and brass areas, the gold kind of metallics, and we're going to base coat those in a scorched brown from Citadel. And what this dark brown will do is it's got a little bit of a red undertone, so it'll help bring out the kind of bronze, coppery almost color we want these metallics to have. And so this is just going to be a base layer. This you want to keep tidy, because if you get this into the white sections of the armor, it'll be a real pain to go back over and fix. So just be careful, take your time, use a fine detail brush, and just go through and pick out all the parts you want to be the dark metallics. Batch painting like this, while it's definitely the most effective and efficient way to paint a large quantity of stuff in a hurry, especially if it's, one model that's a bunch of bits like this, or whether it's a whole squad of models you're trying to knock out in a hurry, it's still a time-consuming process, and it can be very tedious because you end up spending a lot of time painting the same color. Now that we have the bronze and the wood base coated with the scorched brown, we're going to go over what's going to be the gray metallics, the steel and whatever other gray metallics we have, and we're going to base coat those with Dawnstone, also from Citadel. And these are usually some very fine details on this model, so we're just going to take our time. We're going to use our fine detail brush. We're going to make sure the paint is the right consistency so it flows off the brush without too much effort and without puddling, and then we're just going to really carefully pick out the details we want to be the gray metallics. Okay, so next up we're going to paint the bronze and gold metal, the parts that we want to be those gold metal tones. We're going to paint that with Vallejo's Model Color Bronze. Now, one of the things to be aware of as you're painting with metallic paints like this, the actual metallics, is that the pigments in them are really heavy and chunky. So if you're using a really good brush, you want to keep rinsing it out, keep them from drying in there, because it can really mess up a good brush. So keep that in mind, but get in there, paint it all nice and smooth, take your time, be very careful at this step because the metallics are kind of hard to paint over, so also keep that in mind. Now that we have the armor and most of the other large details done, the next thing to do is to paint the green cloth. Now I use Dark Angel's green from Citadel, but you can also use any just dark forest green color, especially since this is an older paint and it takes a couple coats to get the opacity that I want. That's probably due to the age of the paint, because these are substantially older. On that note, some of the paint names that I use, especially the older Citadel paint names, are probably wrong. I've been doing this a while, and the bulk of my paint collection is older Citadel stuff. I haven't done a complete refresh on it in a long time. I have slowly been adding new stuff and other brands, but all my Citadel paints are kind of old, so that's definitely something to keep in mind if you can't find the color that I say I use, or if you can't find a particular shade, or if your paint pots look different than mine. That's probably why. So next up, we're going to pick out the gray silver metallics using Citadel's bolt gun metal, and we're just going to pick out all the things like the extra hardware on the weapons, the clip on the rifle, and that sort of thing, the bolts on the crossbow. Just take your time, be tidy. These are small details, so you want to be careful not to get the metallic paint anywhere it's not supposed to be. So the next thing I tackled was painting the pinion feathers, or the metal slats that replicated them on the winged jetpack. I wanted these to be stark white. So at this point, I spent a lot of time thinning down and painting on layer after layer of Citadel's white scars. So you want to make sure that when you're doing this, especially when you're trying to get pure white, that you take your time and you really keep your paints thin and just paint on as many layers as it takes. Your first couple may turn out looking splotchy. That's okay. You just keep going over them. Make sure that the paint's thin enough it doesn't show brush strokes or anything. And make sure that you use a wet palette if you have one available. It'll help prevent clumps from forming and help keep your paint flowing smoothly, because it doesn't take much on white for any little bit of imperfection to stand out. Even though I took my time and followed all those steps, I still ended up with some spots that were a little lumpy in the final product. I'm still proud of it. It still looks good. It's just that little bit of clumpiness. There's a couple spots where I'm not 100% on, but overall it turned out pretty well. But this is definitely a step that you want to take your time with and really, really go careful. So as I was painting on these endless layers of white, one thing that you have to really be careful of is try to avoid the recesses where the wash is settled. You want to leave those there so they help highlight some of the difference in detail. So coming down to the home stretch, the next step is painting the face. So this is going to be a few steps, but we're going to start with base coating it with Army Painter's Barbarian Flesh. So this is just going to be a coat. Make sure you get all of the skin. There's one of the arms that also has the exposed flesh in this case, because it was the gladiators uh, with the pole arms, I think was what they were called from the model range. But in particular, any bare skin, especially the face, make sure you get around the back of the neck and the ears and everything as you're doing this as well. And make sure your paint's watered down enough to where it really gets in there and flows everywhere it's supposed to be. You don't want it to quite be a wash, but at the same time you don't want it to leave brush strokes or gum up the facial features. So be careful with that. With the flesh base coated, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to base coat her hair. I've decided, since the model is a lot of warm tones and a lot of creams and whites, I wanted something that would pop out a little more but still look natural, so I went with kind of a bright reddish orange hair. So here I'm just base coating her hair with Army Painter's red leather. So the next step is kind of an optional one, but the next thing I went through and did was I went around and edge highlighted some of the details that I wanted to bring out. Since this is going to be more of a display model and something that I'm giving to somebody else, I wanted it to be some of my best work. So I added an extra layer of highlighting in the form of edge highlights. And the best way to do this is to go around and just very carefully pick out the raised edges of stuff you want to draw attention to, using a lighter color, slightly lighter color than what the base coat was. And you can do multiple layers of this even. Like for the bronze, you could do like I did with Army Painter Brass and build it back up. For the cream colors, I slowly worked up, blended in some pure white into my Ashanti bone, and I did a couple layers up into where there's the highest layer is just a pure white edge highlight. So that's an optional step. It's if you're really trying hard to put a lot of effort into the model and want that extra bit of pop to it. Um, from a distance on the tabletop, you really probably won't even notice it, but I think it adds a cool effect, especially up close when you're really looking at the model. At this point, the model's mostly finished. I'm just going around and kind of going the extra mile on some things. Like here I'm highlighting the face again with a layer of 1-to-1 mixed Army Painter Barbarian flesh and Citadel's elf flesh, and this is to help bring out her raised cheekbones, forehead, chin, just enough to really add some extra depth to her face, in addition to the shading. That way you can see every bit of detail on her face. After this, I also went through and did the eyes, but my camera angle when I did the eyes wasn't very good, and so I'm not going to bother showing it. You can't really see what I was doing. The short version is you carefully, from the side of the model, go in and paint an off-white into where the eyeball is. Be careful not to get outside of the eyelids too much. And then once you've got that done, go through and add a dot for the iris, the color of the eye. I believe I chose blue for hers, or green. I'm not sure exactly now. I think blue. But anyway, just added a splash of color into her eyes. Just be careful, make sure you look at it head on, make sure you get the eyes facing the same direction. If you don't on the first try, of course you can always go back and paint over it. I think it took me about 3 tries to get her eyes exactly how I wanted them. So just take your time, be careful. Eyes are a pain and it takes a lot of work to get them right. And really for tabletop quality models, they're not usually worth the effort. Most of the time those models are seen from 2 to 5 feet away or more, so you'll never notice that the eyes are even painted as long as the eye socket and the brow is shaded. You'll never notice. Again, this is more of a display model and a showing off the best of what I can do for somebody as a model swap. So I'm going the extra mile to make sure everything is as good as I can get it. And here I'm just going to apply the same highlight tone, the mix, to the flesh on her arm. Okay, we're getting down to the last bit of the detail on the head. So the next thing that I did was, after I got the layers built up to where I wanted them on her face and hair, I went back and added some shading by using washes. I used Army Painter's red tone for her hair to really make the red pop and keep the color consistent even in the deep recesses between the strands. And for her face, I used Army Painter's soft shade. And I used my detail brush to paint these into the individual areas I wanted them. I wanted to be really careful with this and keep it tidy. I didn't want any of the wash going anywhere other than where it was supposed to be on the appropriate areas, because I didn't want to have to fight with trying to get the red tone or whatever else off of that white cream toned armor. That would have just been a nightmare. So make sure when you're doing this, you're nice and tidy and keep it clean if you're going to. And then the last thing I did after this was went back and did some edge highlighting with an even heavier, like 2-to-1 mix of the elf flesh and barbarian shade with just a touch of white added to it to bring out like the detail around her nose and her cheekbones and her ears. And then I went back over the hair to get some of the highest raised areas with just the pure red leather again to really bring out the tonality of her hair as well. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed the video and the process. This was a complete start to finish one model that's supposed to be pretty high detail and high quality results, and all in all I'm pretty happy with it. And being able to swap the model's arms out and backpack out for different gear really just adds to the versatility of the model, and I think the project was a lot of fun. So thanks to Melanie for being up for doing this model swap. I'm really looking forward to seeing what she's put together for me. I've got this out shipped in the mail, but with everything going on in the world, it'll be a little while before I get anything back or before she actually gets the model in hand, unfortunately. So anyway, as soon as I do get that back, I'll make sure to post an update showing off what exactly she did. Also, big thank you to Anvil Industries. Of course, I'm, like I said earlier, very excited to be able to use their models in our publication. Looking forward to using them in S.E.E.R. These models are fantastic, and so are the rest of them. So if you like this video and you want to see more, be sure to hit the like, hit the bell notification icon, and subscribe. Make sure to check us out. We put up weekly updates at the moment. Hopefully that continues. The world's changing and you never know where things are going to land. If you really like what we're doing, be sure to support us at Buy Me a Coffee. You would just tip a couple bucks so we can buy ourselves coffee. And be sure to check us out on Patreon as well. Our Patreon for next month includes a solo play campaign mission for S.E.E.R. And remember, as soon as you subscribe, you also get access to the playtest rules for S.E.E.R. So be sure to check that out. And thank you guys very much for watching. The world's a crazy place and you could be spending your time doing a lot of different things right now, and I appreciate you guys checking out the content we're putting out. So thank you guys very much. But remember, at the Clock Tower, it's always game time.